and I would like to start our panel. Yes, today is our panel, which is called Intercultural Communication and Translation Issues. And my moderator, my name is Volkova Yana Alexandrovna, for those who don't know. And my moderator today is Irini Teodoridou. She is a postgraduate student at the Institute of Foreign Languages, and she will help us with today's panel. My question is, before we start, shall we follow the order in the program, or is there anybody who wants to be first for some reasons?
I wasn't informed for anything like that.
Okay, I see. Evgenia, yes, please. Evgenia. What do you want to say? You want to be first or what?
Well, as usual.
As usual, no. We have a list of speakers here according to the program, and if we violate this order, we need to have some reason. Yeah, but that's why I'm asking. Is there anybody who wants to speak first? Okay, Zhenya wants to speak first. Yes. Irina, but it was your talk, yeah?
I don't mind.
You don't mind?
No,
all right.
No worries.
So let's change the order, and then we'll start with Yerina Evgenia, and then we proceed according to the order in the program, yes, in the conference program. So, Zhenya, would you like to share your presentation yourself, or do you need any assistance?
Sure, I can share it.
You can share it yourself. All right. You can turn on your camera.
Sure. In a second.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Yeah, it works.
It works. All right. Perfect.
This one. And the presentation. Actually, I don't have any reasons. I just like.
Okay, please. You go. Irina was so kind as to let you first, to let you be first.
No one minds. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So while Jenny is preparing, our time limit is about 5 minutes for your presentation of your findings here, and about 5 minutes to asking questions here, on asking questions. Every participant is welcome to ask questions, because it's a good training, it's a good rehearsal for our students, for our master students, before their final presentation at the end of this academic year. So all our participants today are master students, but for Irina, who is a postgraduate student. All right.
Actually, I would like to note that the presentation should be 10 minutes and the Q&A should be 5 minutes, just to make sure.
Okay, let it be 10.
So no, should it be 5 or 10? I'm confused now.
Between 5 and 10. Let's.
Okay. Great.
All right. Thank you.
So, can you see my presentation? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, if you don't mind, I'm gonna start. My topic is the comparison of the parsing tree structure in relation to English-Japanese translation. The work is done by me. My advisor is Yana Alexandrovna. The topicality of my work is the increasing need for quality machine translation and the rising amount of data processed daily, and also the global tendency for digitalization, be it affected by the COVID-19 pandemic or not. The purpose of this study is to determine the peculiarities of the parsing trees construction and to suggest the sequence of transformations for parsing trees conversion. I have decided on the following tasks. First is to create the parsing trees and to study their peculiarities, then to compare the parsing trees, then to analyze trees and the conversion from one language to another, and then to suggest a transformation sequence. The methods I use in my work are scientific modeling. It is used to construct the parsing trees for the sentences. The comparative method is used to compare the resulting structures, and the analytical method is used to evaluate the results and to suggest the sequence of transformations. So here you can see a parsing tree for an English phrase, which was taken from the Martin Luther King's Jr. Speech, the speech, "I Have a Dream." And to be concise, we have the straight word order, which is subject, verb, object. You can also see that we have 11 preceding elements, which mostly consist of determiners, adjectives, and some verbal modifiers. And 14 elements are following their parent nodes. So the conclusions for the English language, we have the right branching main direction, which is with most of elements are following their parent nodes, and the left branching movement is used for determinants such as adjectives and articles and other. And here we come to Japanese translation of the phrase. As you can see, we have the verb at the top in the right corner. And the word order for Japanese is subject, object, verb, which is why the verb is located where it is located. We have 25 preceding elements and 3 following, which are presented by the flexions of the plurality for names, which is quite rarely used, and for verbal flexions. And the conclusion is that we have straight left branching direction for the tree movement, as you can see, which is actually the opposite of the English structure. So as a result, I propose the following transformation sequence. First step is to tag the parts of speech. The second step is to create a chain of relationships between the elements. Third step is the determination of subject and predicate, and if the sentence is complex, then we have to highlight the subjects and predicates and conjunctions, because if we have complex sentences, we can split them and parse them separately, but we will need the point of agglutination for these sentences and for the resulting structures. Then we build the parsing trees, and then we can convert the parsing tree from one language to another. Then we process inflections, prepositions, and punctuation, and remove the residual elements at the end. So coming to the conclusions and further research, the conclusions are that the language have drastically different structure movement, which is from right to left for Japanese, and for English the main structure goes from left to right, and the determinants go from right to left. And also we have a lot of inflections in the Japanese language, which allow us to split the words, because the Japanese language doesn't use spaces between the words. And that is, in my opinion, the best way to differentiate where one element ends and the other starts. And for further research, I would like to increase the amount of data processed, which would allow for more precise and more detailed algorithm, which might be it might be useful to have some programming skills and knowledge for creation of this. But if I have time, I would work on that, or I could find a partner for further research. That's all for me. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Evgenia. Questions, please, from the audience. You can raise your hands or speak directly. Okay, I see that there are no questions from the audience, but probably I have a small question. Do you mean that this algorithm can be automatically applied to the translation from Japanese into English and vice versa?
Theoretically speaking, yes. Practically speaking, we would need a bit more detailed and a bit more in-depth instructions for the machine to work. And we would also need to have some reference material, and to see if it works correctly, we would have to train the machine. There are training bases in the internet, and a lot of people do that. But for that, I need some programming skills, so I couldn't do this in this research paper.
So you mean you need some assistance, some professional assistance?
Yeah. Sadly, that's it. Yeah.
Sadly. Okay, so you don't have enough skills for that right now. But still, it looks like that it is very prospective field of research. And I would love you to continue it, not to stop here.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I have a question as well.
Okay, so please.
Yes. So, Evgenia, you've already explained us the differences, especially the different structure movements. I would like to know if you've uncovered any similarities in terms of these structures.
In terms of similarities, there are some interesting points. Like, I don't know if you can see, there's a gray line here. I have some components grayed out in the Japanese structure and in the English structure. In the English structure, there are the verbal modifiers, which show the tense of the verb. And in the Japanese, we also have not exactly the same modifiers, but this verbal tense, it really greatly overlaps with the English tense here. But there's one problem with this, because not problem, more like issue, because the common principle of building Partition trees is that each component of the tree should correspond to the word. But as you can see in Japanese, there are no like strict borders between words, but this part, which is written in kana, not in hieroglyphics, this part is not strictly a word on its own. It's more like an inflection. But if we select the English components of tense, in my opinion, it would be rightful to select the same components in the Japanese, or we should move the modification of tense to the upper level, like have some additional signs for the verb here, and then these components won't have, these words won't have any separate components for them. So yeah, the correspondence in this specific case is the verbal form. We also have the correspondence in the modifiers preceding the nouns and the concepts they modify, but in Japanese it's like more straightforward than in the English language, because the whole structure is from right to left, and in the English we have only the modifiers from right to left. And there are some more different, more similarities, but I can't recall them off the top of my head at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions?
Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Zhenya. We wish you every luck, very good luck in your in finalizing your work, your research, and going on with it after graduation from the master's school. Thank you very much. So I guess we're going to continue according to the program, according to the list of our speakers. So our next speaker is Irini Theodoridou from the Institute of Foreign Languages, postgraduate student, and her presentation will be devoted to the animal proverbs and adages as a linguo-cultural concept in the Greek language. So the floor is all yours, Irini.
Just a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see my screen?
Yes, it's not full screen, but...
What about now?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Great. So, hello everybody once again, glad you could make it. My name is Irini Theodoridou and the topic of today's presentation is animal proverbs and adages as a linguo-cultural concept in the Greek language. The purpose of the research is to analyze the phraseological units of animal proverbs and adages in the Greek language, to determine the intercultural phenomenon called proverb, and to identify the particular reason why animal proverbs and adages are so apparent in Greek folklore, legacy, and oral tradition. To accomplish this goal, the following tasks were set: to specify the reasons why such phraseological units appear in Greek tradition, to identify their purpose, and to pinpoint the equivalents in the English language. The outline task required the use of methods such as analysis and discussion on particular phraseological units, comparative linguistic analysis on these units in the English and Greek languages. Analyzing the linguistic background of a community should not be limited to language and understanding, but should also include the study of the cultural background, of which proverbs and adages are a crucial part. The exploration of the following physiological units is classified according to animal groups and species. The process is as follows. First of all, the pronunciation of each physiological unit is stated. Secondly, numerics through translation technique is utilized just to transmit the meaning of the word from Greek into English. Thirdly, the context of each proverb and adage is asserted. And last but not least, the equivalent in the English language is disclosed. Much attention is given to animal proverbs and adages, as there are numerous cases in Greek folk legacy and oral tradition, which refer to animals as the main protagonists. It is plausible to have such phraseological units appear, as observing and understanding animal behavior has always been common, especially in the past. Acknowledging the main characteristics of each animal, people aim to describe, stigmatize, or even praise human behaviors. Animals have always been a point of reference. Therefore, it is not surprising that they are so often mentioned in proverbs and adages. Moving on, let us analyze a few cases. The first case would be «Του χαρίσανε γάιδαρο και τον κοιτάει στα δόντια». The true translation technique would be «They gifted him a donkey and he is looking at its teeth». This proverb is often used to emphasize that we should not be ungrateful when we are offered a gift, regardless of what it is. For those who are unfamiliar with livestock, let us explain. By taking a look at a donkey's teeth, it is possible to calculate its age and therefore its potential value. While this action is perfectly acceptable when buying cattle, checking the animal that you are given is without a doubt ill-mannered. After all, it is a gift. This expression is utilized when the receiver is considered ungrateful. The English equivalent would be a give horse, look not at his teeth, or do not look a gift horse in the mouth. The next case would be είπε ο γάιδαρος στον πετεινό κεφάλα. The true translation would be the donkey called the rooster big-headed. The English equivalent of the phraseological unit would be the pot calling the kettle black, or look who's talking. It is something you say that means people should not criticize someone else for a fault that they themselves have. An amusing synonym of this idiom would be «Η καμήλα δεν κοιτάει την καμπούρα της». The true translation would be «The camel does not see its own hump». And the English equivalent would be «Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own?» Or «People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones». This set phrase is again self-explanatory. Regarding the English equivalent, it has a dual meaning, since first attacking the hypocrisy of those who criticize others while ignoring their own much larger flaws, and since the flaw is in the eye, it is a metaphor for how such flaws can blind one. Moving on, the following proverb would be «Ο λύκος τρίχα αλλάζει, γνώμη δεν αλλάζει». The true translation would be «The wolf may change its fur, but not its opinion». The main point of the proverb is to emphasize that, notwithstanding the life lessons, the promises a person makes, any setbacks or changes a person might face, basic personality traits do not change. Many believe that the wolf cannot be tamed or does not forget its wild nature, despite its fur changing or aging. This adage highlights the difficulty to change behavioral patterns, bad habits, or defects. This, of course, does not mean that the goal cannot be achieved. It is not uncommon that we see people who are more strong-willed, resolutely persistent, or more quote-unquote bloodthirsty than the wolf itself. The English equivalent would be «A leopard does not change its spots». May we add a synonym to the adage? «Ο λύκος κι αν εγέρασε και άσπρισε το μαλλί του, ούτε τη γούνα του άλλαξε, ούτε την κεφαλή του». The true translation would be «The wolf got old and its fur became white, but it neither changed its fur nor its head», meaning mindset. In terms of meaning, there are no differences in this case. A person's behavior does not change regardless of the passage of time. Last but not least, we have the proverb «Η γάτα είναι εφτάψυχη». The true translation would be «The cat has 7 lives». The belief that cats have 9 lives stems from ancient Egypt, where cats were considered sacred animals. The Egyptians believed that the cats had supernatural abilities. This notion was also applied to the theory of reincarnation, since Egyptians were convinced that cats, similar to humans, could be reborn. According to another version, the ancient sun god Atum-Ra, a sun god who gave life to the gods of air, moisture, earth, and sky, who in turn produced Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Memphis. These gods are collectively known as the Ennead, stemming from the Greek word Ennea, meaning the 9. Atum-Ra, who took the form of a cat for visits to the underworld, embodied 9 lives in one creator. Many Mediterranean countries shared the same viewpoint of the cat having 7 lives, while Turkish and Arabic legends speak of cats having 6 lives. Others believe that this expression originates from the Celtic myth of the cat Sith, a witch who could transform into a cat 9 times. The English equivalent would, of course, be «A cat has 9 lives». The analyzed material allows us to draw the following conclusions. The caricature figure of the donkey is associated with ingratitude, see the first example, or ignorance, see the second example. However, when translating these proverbs and adages into the English equivalents, we perceive that the donkey does not insinuate the same values and is not generally used as an example in the English language. To put it into perspective, when inspecting English phraseological units, the caricature figure of the donkey is hosted by the horse, see the first example, or even by people, see the second example. In contrast to the aforementioned examples, the wolf resembles a more established concept. As stated above, this animal appears to represent identical conceptualizations in both the English and Greek languages. This animal motif is affiliated with abdurancy and inflexibility. See the third example. Last but not least, the cat-mouse dynamic is a duo known to all, but when the cat is featured independently, it customarily represents perseverance and rebirth. See the fourth example. The function of these phraseological units stems from oral folk tradition. These instances derived from everyday circumstances and the perception of the world through the eyes of the common person. This hypothesis is gleaned from the fondness of the Greek folk for national and cultural traditions and customs. Another reason for the numerous cases may be the observation of the local fauna that historically inhabits the territory of Greece. No one can deny that Greek phraseology and paremiology reflect local customs and traditions, the people's mindsets, the life values, and the overall mentality of the nation. That is all. Thank you for your attention. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you. I see hands. I see Polina. Polina, please. Demyanova Polina is asking her question.
Yes,
please.
I'm going to turn on my camera so that you can see me. Hi, hello. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really interesting to listen to. My question is the following. I have noticed that in the English language nowadays, people don't really use these proverbs, not only the ones related to animals, but in general. They don't really use proverbs that much. And I would say that young people, teenagers, they sometimes don't even know the meaning of these proverbs. So I wanted to ask you, what is the situation like in Greece? Would you say that it's the same trend, or do people still widely use these proverbs?
I would like to say that these proverbs related to animals and proverbs and adages in general are used in everyday life in Greece, and even if teenagers are not willing to use them at the moment, they are all familiar with these cases and know exactly what they mean. So this would be a great opportunity for example, to get in touch with the cultural background during practical classes in the Greek language.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Irene, I have a question, and since our panel is called Translation Issues, my question will be about translation. I like to thank you for really fascinating examples. I mean, it's really interesting. It's always interesting to study, fascinating to study intercultural links, and the differences, the specificity, actually, what we call intercultural specificity. But my question is about translation. So you know that translating such units as proverbs and sayings is probably a very risky issue for a translator, especially in oral translation. So, as for you as a translator, what can you say? Will it be a reasonable or, let's say, safe solution not to translate proverbs at all if you come across them in an oral translation? Or should a translator, what should a translator do if he, for example, has to translate, he or she has to translate this donkey proverb or cat proverb or any kind of proverb?
As you've already, thank you for your question, first of all. As you already stated, it is extremely risky to try to translate these phraseological units in oral during an oral translation. The ideal situation would be to use the translation equivalent of the language.
You mean not through translation, but the equivalent?
The translation equivalent, yes, because through translation, it just doesn't make sense. So the listeners wouldn't understand.
Mm-hmm. But the problem is, in my opinion, and I think all people involved with intercultural communication know that even from your presentation, it was clear that the connotations, the cultural connotations are different. Even if we translate, let's say, very close to their original, about, for example, cat, with 7 lives or 9 lives,
Yes.
So, I mean, in my opinion, I believe that it's quite risky even to translate with an equivalent. Okay, probably there are some other opinions here, or some suggestions or anything. Oh, people
I would like to hear them if there are any.
Yeah, because that's always a very serious matter for a translator. When translating between cultures, not even between languages, I mean, directly, but it's translation between cultures, what we have now, I mean, when translating proverbs.
Well, I think...
Sorry. So, Zhenya, please, you go first.
What we've been taught usually is we should avoid the analog phrases and the similar phrases because of connotations and because the speaker could further develop the situation using the animals if it's an animal translation phrase, and that could lead to some serious mind process which the translator, especially if we're talking about the simultaneous interpretation, could not let themselves do. So we were taught to avoid these phrases and just tell the audience what is the meaning of the phrase.
If you can get it yourself here.
And I wanted to add the same. Yeah,
Good luck with that.
If you know the meaning of the phrase, of this proverb or idiom or anything, you, as a translator, you most likely will have to explain. If you know the exact equivalent, then maybe you could use it. But then again, no equivalent is always 100% equivalent. So yeah, there is this risk that you will use this equivalent, but it will turn out that it has some different connotation, some different meaning. So yeah, it could be dangerous. So the best way to approach... Yeah.
And associations and connotations of the word donkey in Russian, for example. I think it's quite different from Greek, obviously. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for the questions, for the excellent presentation. And
thank you for your comments.
We are moving on, and we continue talking about intercultural specificity or specifics of various expressions and translation problems, real problems associated with them. So our next presentation is from Milana Krasotskaya, and their topic is color naming in idioms. So we're again talking about idioms and its impact on connotation. You're welcome, Milana, please.
Hello. Okay, let me adjust my camera. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Great. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, it's not full screen. If you can make it full screen, it would be perfect.
I'll try. How about now?
No, nothing changed actually. Try one more time.
Strange, because I've changed it actually.
Oh, no, nothing has changed. Sorry.
Well, let me try again.
If there is any difficulty, Irini will help you.
No, right.
Help to tell her about the slides.
Of course. Let me know if you need anything.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, one more time. It's again. Is it still in the window mode?
Yes,
unfortunately.
Not full.
Oh my God.
Should I try? Don't worry.
Well, yeah. Could you help me, please?
You try,
of course. Yes, just a moment. Can you see the presentation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is it full screen?
Yes.
Now it is, yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Okay, I'll tell you when to change the slides. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Milana Krasotska, and today I'm going to speak about color naming in idioms and its impact on connotation. So, as we all know, color is one of the key elements in both psychology and linguistics, and in linguistics, it actually comprises a vast group of idioms, of color idioms. Next slide, please. So the purpose of my article or of my presentation today was to discover how the traditional comprehension of colors affected the connotation of English idioms. And for this, there were some objectives, for example, to examine the meaning of colors in English and American tradition, to find idioms with color marking, and to analyze how their connotation was affected by the attitudes towards certain colors. Next slide, please. There was some methodology like sampling. We sampled out around 250 idioms actually to analyze them. Then lexicographic analysis, comparative method, and quantitative calculation. Before I move on, let me briefly give some 101 course into what an idiom actually is and what I've been doing for the past 5 years, studying them. So basically, idioms don't have a unified definition, and we can say that there are some criteria to distinguish idioms. For example, a low level of motivation, impenetrability and inseparability. Then their common meaning cannot be equal to a sum of the components of each idiom. Then it has national coloring, like, from, for example, some historical events affecting those idioms. Then they create a certain mental image. They don't have a finished idea, unlike proverbs, for example. And finally, there is a lack of underlying folk wisdom. Again, like in Proverbs, so idioms are quite different from them. Next slide, please. So in order to analyze the idioms, we actually studied, and this is actually from the cross-cultural communication course, we studied the BerlinK Theory. In a nutshell, this theory tells us that there is some evolution within languages, because with the evolution of a language, there is one new color introduced into the language. For example, there is a naming of this color, and then it is, for example, used in describing something, and finally in an idiom. And as you can see on the slide, there were several stages, 7 stages to be precise, distinguished in this theory. So the first 2 basic languages are black and white. Of course, we know, because morals, good and bad, so forth. Then it was red. Then it was either yellow or green. Then it was both yellow and green. Then it was blue. A 6th stage, brown, and finally purple, orange, gray, and pink. And actually, in English language, there are 11 basic colors. So this theory was quite universal, as the authors thought, for example, for all the languages, because the basic colors like black, white, and red were present in most of the languages. So next slide, please. Now we're moving on to beautiful pictures and some statistics in our analysis. Next slide, please. So black is the first color. It is the color of formality, elegance, death, evil, mourning, bad luck, mystery, and night. So mostly of negative things. there were 52 idioms, 7 of them, and only 7 of them were positive, 45 were negative. So you can see this beautiful pie chart and the topics of the idioms that were included. Like in positive, it was finance and business. In negative, it was health communication, mental, physical health issues, danger, bad luck, and deviant behavior. Next slide, please. White. Next slide again. This is the color of purity, peace, innocence, angels, and doctors. So mostly positive color. Again, you can see the pie chart, and there were 40 idioms, 22 of which were positive and 18 negative. Well, it's close to being even, but still. Next slide, please. Red color. Next slide again. This is the color of energy, passion, love, evil, and danger. And there were 32 idioms, 10 of those were positive and 22 were negative. Again, pie chart, you can see it. Next slide. Yellow. Next slide again. The color of happiness, hope, cowardice, jealousy, warning, envy. There were only 8 idioms, unfortunately. 2 of them were positive, 6 of them were negative. And if we look into the hue of yellow, which is golden, it was mostly positive, but I'm not going to talk about it because we're talking about yellow, not about its hue. Next slide, please. Green color. Next slide again. The color of jealousy, greed, spring, luck, and nature. There were 29 idioms. 20 of them were positive, 9 of them were negative. Next slide, please. Blue. Next slide again. The color of religion, trust, tranquility, sadness, and depression, unfortunately. There were 45 idioms. 13 of them were positive and 32 were negative. Next slide. Brown. So we are moving towards the more advanced colors, so to say. Next slide again. This is mostly the color of nature, and unfortunately there were 6 idioms and all of them were negative somehow. Next slide, please. Pink and violet. Well, in our view, it was unnecessary to divide those 2 colors into their respective groups because there weren't that many idioms in each of those colors, and they were quite, I would say, close to each other in their connotation. Next slide, please. These are the colors of mystery, royalty, love, creativity, and innovations. And there were 13 idioms, and they were quite even, 7 positive and 6 negative. Next slide, please. Orange. Next slide again. The color of autumn, harvest, warmth, and of course Halloween. There were only 4 idioms. 3 of them were positive. 1 of those was negative. Gray. Next slide, please. And again, next slide. The color of loss and depression, unfortunately, a pretty depressing color. So here we didn't really have any positive idioms. 5 of them were actually neutral and 3 of them were negative. Next slide, please. So now let's move on to the conclusions. So because this is actually a conference about also interpretation, when we looked into translating such idioms, there were only 2 types of translation, unless they have a full equivalent or an analog. So you can either use Calkin and convey them fully into another language, or you can use descriptive translation. For example, as with such idiom as white elephant, because, well, you can't really say what it is in 2 words. It's more than 2 words. Then out of 248 analyzed idioms, 60% of them, or 149, had a negative connotation in English language due to the climate, geography, history, and culture of the UK. And those results can be applied to teaching cross-cultural communication and translation theory, because there are quite a lot of lacunae in Russian language in order to translate such idioms, and also because idioms is a quite, complex topic for studying for students. So this is it. Thank you very much for your attention. You are welcome to ask any questions.
Thank you. Or I see one hand. Paulina, please. You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I do have a question. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really interesting to listen to. My question is not really related to your topic directly, but I still wanted to ask, maybe you have done some research on that. Do you know the percentage of these color-related idioms in the English language, like how prominent they are in the English language compared to all the other idioms? And maybe you have some data on the Russian language as well to compare. Are they as popular in Russian as they are in English?
Good question.
Thank you very much for your question. Well, I can only make a little prediction here because, well, I haven't done any statistics in this field.
Yeah, that's why I said it's not related to your topic directly, but I still wanted to ask. Yeah.
So if we look into a thematic classification of idioms, this is a pretty vast group, actually. It's one of the first, I think, groups there, just like food idioms, for example, because there's quite a lot of means of food. But as for Russian, we don't really have that many idioms. That's why, we can't really translate these idioms from English into Russian, still preserving their color marking, because we don't have that many idioms with color marking in Russian.
So we would have to explain those idioms, right? We don't have exact equivalents. Okay, I see. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I have another hand. Yes, Zhenya, please.
I had a bit of similar question to Paulina's, actually. I was wondering if you have studied the situation with Russian idioms also, and if the negative or positive splitting might be similar, or is it drastically different? Does it differ drastically? I'm sorry. In Russian color idiom front, if you have studied those.
Well, again, thank you very much for your question. I haven't really studied the situation with Russian language, but again, I can make a little prediction on this in this case. So I think it's going to be the same pretty much, because we have quite the same geography, so to say, for the European parts of Russia, because again, it's pretty dull here. So we're all pretty negative about everything. And because of this negative attitude towards our lives, the same attitude goes to the idioms with colors. And because I would say that we have quite a lot of, again, black color, gray color, white color, so monochromatic point of view, so to say. That's why I would say that's quite a lot of negative connotations here in Russian language.
May I add another question? But just
all right, of course.
Do you find that the amount of black and white, the monochrome idioms, might be related to your slide telling us about the history of color appearance in the language? Because if I'm not mistaken, you told that these two colors were the first to appear in languages, and maybe the reason why they're most frequent is just that they're most old?
Well, yeah, it could be, but actually this theory is quite controversial because it was further criticized by some scholars, because it's not always the same sequence of the color appearance in languages. So another color can be the first one to appear, not essentially black or white.
So it's not the same for languages, for every language.
Yes, so it's mostly extralinguistic factors in this case.
Thank you.
Right. Can I add something, since I'm a co-author here? So I would like to add that the issue of culture the issue of color naming is very well studied across cultures. It's one of the most elaborated issues in culture studies. And the question that can be raised and can be asked in this regard is how many of colors are really universal. Milana, have you been interested in this issue, in this question? Because you know that in some Indian cultures, American Indian cultures, they don't have some colors. For example, they don't have light blue. Some cultures, they have just two colors, and neither black and white or green and something I forgot. Yeah. So how many of these colors are really universal?
Well, again, I'll make a prediction that first of all, if we look into color theory, like from arts, I know it's not related really to language, but still, if we look into this, there are three primary colors: yellow, red, and blue. So I think mostly the most cultures at least have these three colors. Then we have the secondary colors, for example, violet, orange, and green. They are not as widely spread as the primary colors. So I think it's mostly a split between those three colors and maybe black and white, again, because of the morals. Because if something is morally good, you call it white. If it's morally bad, it's black. And if it's a gray area, it's a gray area again.
I see. Okay, so it's probable. I wouldn't be very sure about it, but that's kind of possible. Yeah? Mm-hmm. This kind of distribution, yes, of color distribution. All right, I had some more questions, but then we'll discuss it probably later. I have something in mind.
May I add?
Mm-hmm,
actually,
please.
It's not a question, it's a comment. From an artistic point of view, since I have a background in visual and applied arts, white and black are not considered colors, they are considered tones.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this approach will change your research, but keep that in mind.
Okay, black is actually a lack of color, as far as I know, and magenta doesn't exist.
But the idioms of these colors do exist. Yeah?
Yes.
And that means that language here is very specific about colors. Yeah, that black and white are colors according to the language.
Yes. Funny enough, there are even idioms without colors, like with the flying colors. There is no color, but still there is color.
Or colorless idioms. Idioms. All right. Thank you very much, Milana.
Thank you.
Any questions from the audience? No more? See here. We have some people here who keep silence. So you're all welcome to the discussion. So, and we continue. So our next talk is also about lingua-cultural specifics, or specificity, as the author called it. But now we're moving on from colors to emotions. And you know that some emotions are definitely associated with colors. And this emotion was associated with depression in Milana's presentation with blue color. And we're talking about loneliness. And I invite Armen Ptukian, who is here already, yes, with his talk on lingua-culturological specificity of the emotional concept loneliness. And this is the comparative aspect in the British and Russian language pictures of the world. So please, Armen, welcome.
Yes, I'll try to share my screen. Give me a minute. Okay, can you see it from the big?
Yes.
Okay. Full screen, right?
Great.
Full screen, yes.
Yes, okay. So, good evening, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Armen Ptukian, and I'd like to present a little topic about loneliness in British and Russian language pictures of the world. And loneliness is equally important for any human culture, since it reflects a fact that exists in life, the identification of oneself as a person in the society. And today there's a lack of social communication, which generates loneliness. And this become a tendency, sadly. We all live in a pandemic situation, COVID around us, and mostly we're trying to avoid people and live alone. And this generates loneliness. Yes. And in this regard, an accurate definition of the emotional concept of loneliness is necessary to develop ways to solve the rising issues. And the object of our research is the emotional concept of loneliness, verbalized by means of English and Russian languages. The subject of the research is the intercultural specificity of the emotional concept of loneliness in two linguistic pictures of the world, British and Russian. The purpose of research is to determine the features of the functioning of the emotional concept loneliness in Russian and English. I will try to explain what means a concept. So the concept is a complex mental formation in the structure of which the interrelated cognitive and imaginative evaluative parts are distinguished. Thus, the structure of emotional concepts usually includes conceptual, imaginative, and evaluative components. The concept reflects the result of human exploration of the world. In the psychological paradigm, loneliness is regarded as purely negative state. Loneliness is perceived as a disturbing feeling which is accompanied by the perception that a person's social needs are not being met by quantity or quality of social relationship. And moving to the example, from the example we can see that in both language cultures there are similar expressions that mean loneliness. From this we can say that this expression have common meanings expressed through the same verb, and the action is directed at the subject himself. The conceptual component of the emotional concept of loneliness in Russian and English is expressed as a kind of characteristic of a person. So loneliness is prescribed to a lonely person who does not have close people or who has a lack of social interaction. We can conclude that in both languages there is a certain general image of loneliness. Thus, loneliness can be presented as a kind of isolation or a state of separation from other people. The attitude of people towards loneliness has always been negative. This is primarily due to the inability of a person to survive alone. In both the Russian and British pictures of the world, loneliness is seen as a counterproductive emotion. The rules for expressing emotions can differ in terms of expressiveness, direction, and meaning. For linguistics, it is extremely important that different languages describe, fix, and detail the manifestation of certain emotions in different ways. It must be emphasized that any person can experience different types of loneliness. It depends on what kind of shortage a person has in interpersonal relationships. However, persistent loneliness has been associated with personality disorders, psychosis, impaired cognitive function, and increased depressive symptoms. By analyzing the components of emotional concept, loneliness, we came to the conclusion that it has a relatively similar structure in the Russian and British language pictures of the world. This is expressed primarily in the fact that in both language culture, loneliness is perceived as a negative state. It has several similar meaning and image. And that's all for me. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I will be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Armen. Any questions?
I think I have one small question, maybe. Why did you choose loneliness as a subject of your research?
Yes, it's due primarily to the COVID situation. Like I see many people trying to avoid people, and from time to time they feel themselves depressed, and they ask questions to themselves, why so? Mm-hmm. And I think this is a good topic to trying to answer these questions.
Yeah, very topical. Yeah, it's a true modern issue. And one more thing, in the conclusion, you said that, as I understand, the English and the Russian understanding of loneliness are similar, right?
Yeah, kind of similar.
So would you say that it makes it easier for us as translators to translate
Yes.
these concepts of loneliness from Russian into English and from English into Russian?
Yes, we can translate it pretty similar and equivalent. Because we have like similar feelings to the loneliness. We can describe person as lonely person, and we can say just одинокий человек.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have a question. Since it seems to me that you have studied the evolution of this concept in the Russian and British pictures of the world, have you or did you manage to find or to reveal any positive component about loneliness? Or are all your components negative?
Yes, there's some kind of positive state, like we can say, for example, lone wolf. The person can be, without context, we can't say even is it positive state or negative state, because lone wolf can like handle situation alone, which is good. And a person can just avoid doing something with other persons because he didn't like.
So you mean there is some ambivalence about this concept, right?
Yes, yes.
About the evaluative component, evaluation of
we have a little more context to describe is the state positive or negative, but mostly it's negative.
And in English, we have solitude also as a concept synonymic to loneliness. Is it close or not very close to loneliness? What are the difference between these two, probably sides of the medal, yes, two sides of the concept?
So if trying to describe solitude, it feels like mostly a person solitude because he wants to be alone. It's depends on himself. Like loneliness, it's a situation in which person occurred. It's not his problem. It's his problem only. And if you're trying to say solitude, it means that a person wish to be alone.
So well, that means that there is something positive about it.
Yes, probably someone just want to be a little alone.
So
noise,
solitude has a more positive evaluation component.
Yeah, mostly.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Is that all? Shall we let him go here?
Actually, I have a question.
You have a question, please.
So, since we mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic, did the approach and the understanding of these terms changed after the beginning of the pandemic?
Excellent question, by the way. Armen, mind it.
Actually,
it's for your final work. I mean, you can write some ideas about it.
Actually, I watched some interesting videos and some articles about the current situation with pandemic and loneliness in general. And mostly the situation just erased the issue, and the problem is really important nowadays. But in terms of concept, it didn't change.
So it's the problem is getting worse, and no additional connotations appear. But I think we should check it, by the way. I mean, the additional connotations to analyze the literature, articles, probably forums, I mean, in the internet, speaking about this aspect.
I guess the question about loneliness is mostly a psychological problem. So
no, but we're talking about linguistic aspects, probably what additional meanings appeared or not appeared. Yeah. So by the way, please write it down somewhere, note it somewhere, because this is a very interesting and very up-to-date aspect.
Definitely, I will check it.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. And we're moving on. We're going on, and our next presentation is exactly okay. It can, to some extent, summarize what has just been done. We're talking about translating of lexical gaps or lacuna in English and Russian publicistic discourse. And the presenter is Polina Demyanova. Please, Polina, the
Yes,
floor is all yours.
I'm trying to. Can you see it, the full screen?
Yes, it's full screen, yes.
Okay, great. Yes, I will try to kind of summarize what has been said here about translating these quote-unquote untranslatable items, but I will, of course, mostly focus on lexical gaps in publicistic discourse. So, yes, here, as you can see on the slide, the topic of my presentation is connected with lexical gaps, which can be found in both Russian and English publicistic discourse, and more specifically, the means of translating these lexical gaps. So the purpose of the study was to analyze the effectiveness of some strategies which can be used to translate lexical gaps, which can be found in English and Russian publicistic discourse. And to achieve this goal, it was necessary to assess the frequency of application of translation strategies for dealing with such lexical gaps from Russian into English and from English into Russian. So the original 100 lexical gaps and their translations were found in modern news articles published in the New York Times, the Guardian, and the Russian newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda, as well as their respective translations into Russian and English. And based on the purpose of this study, we can assess the plan of the study. The first point was connected with the nature of lexical gaps. So we are going to briefly mention what lexical gaps are. Then we're going to talk about the relation of lexical gaps and publicistic discourse. And finally, we will have a look at some examples of how certain translation strategies could be applied when dealing with lexical gaps. Now, of course, as we all know, nowadays, the issue of lacunarity in lexical gaps is very widely discussed. And unfortunately, there is no concrete definition of this term because every researcher has their own opinion, their own approach. They're mostly similar, but still they do have some differences. But in the context of this paper, we will say that lexical gaps are a language reflection of cultural particularities of the people who speak this language. So by this definition, we can say that lexical gaps are connected, very connected with culture. So one of the types of writing that best represents how lexical gaps function is publicistic discourse, of course. Specifically news articles. And here on the slide, we can see the reasons why publicistic discourse is a good reflection of lexical gaps. Now, first of all, such texts as news articles react most quickly to changes in the lexical composition of the language and begin to reflect those changes. Secondly, the main task of this kind of texts is to get an emotional response from the recipient. So they will use a lot of these lexical gaps and cultural phenomenon, if we can say that. And finally, news articles are thoroughly checked, usually. So we can say that this is quality material that reflects the real linguistic situation in the context of a particular culture. And thus, it's clear that the phenomenon of lexical gaps is viewed really well in such texts in publicistic discourse. Now, let's move on to the final question. How can we translate lexical gaps? Because of the nature of lexical gaps and how closely they are connected with culture, it is pretty much impossible to find one exact translation strategy that would work for every single lexical gap. We need to approach every case individually. But still, we can say that the most efficient strategy is the elimination strategy. Now, that doesn't mean that we are just erasing the lexical gap from the text and ignore it altogether. No. We have 4 ways of performing this elimination. So we can either generalize the lexical gap. We can also use the substantiation strategy. We can use the explication strategy, or in some cases, we could use literal translation. And now I propose that we look at some of the examples of how lexical gaps were translated. Now here you can see the original text and the translation. And yes, in the original text, we encountered the word challenges, which is probably one of the most difficult to translate from English into Russian, because the word challenges, according to its definition, has a really sort of deep meaning. It's not just a problem, but it's also a problem that's stimulating to the person who is dealing with this problem. However, here in the translation, the person who was dealing with this lexical gap decided to generalize it, right? To use a more broad meaning to convey the meaning of the lexical gap. Now, the second strategy that could be used is the substantiation strategy. And the nature of this strategy is actually the opposite to the one that I just mentioned. So when we generalize, we use a more broader term, whereas when we use the substantiation strategy, we use a term that has a more narrow meaning. And sometimes it can be necessary, like in this case. The word appointee in the English language can be related to anyone who has been appointed to do any work, whereas in the Russian language we used назначенное лицо, right? It's a bit more narrow, as I said, right? It gives us a more narrow definition and better reflects the meaning of the lexical gap in the Russian language. The next strategy, explication strategy. Sutki is a Russian word which, again, is quite difficult to translate because it's not just day, but day and night and all together, 24 hours, right? And here, the translator decided to explain, hence the name of the strategy, explication. He explained, or she, the meaning of this lexical gap. And finally, literal translation. Now here I should mention that literal translation is definitely not the best strategy to apply when dealing with any kind of translation, specifically with lexical gaps, but sometimes it is necessary, especially when we encounter neologisms and newly created words in the original text. Like here, for example, to understand the full context of this lexical gap, we need to know the full situation. So here in the original text, the author was talking about the city of Astana, which is now known as Nur Sultan, right? The city in Kazakhstan, the capital. And the author of the text was describing how life in the city became akin to living in hell. Thus, he created this neologism, Astana. He created the two, he combined the two words, Ad and Astana. Now, in the translation, of course, the translator could not create a similar neologism in the English language. Maybe it could have been possible, but it's a really difficult task. So what was done here, actually, he, again, or she, translated the word literally, right? Letter by letter, used the transliteration strategy, and then later on explained what he did there, explained the components of the neologism. So we can say that literal translation is pretty much never used on its own. Most of the time we need to add explication afterwards to better convey to the recipient of the text what was meant under this new word. And now I think we can move on to the conclusions. So if you remember, the main task of the main purpose of this research was to find out which translation strategy could be the most effective when dealing with lexical gaps from Russian and from English, when translating them from Russian and from English. And we have counted those 100 examples, and it was found that in the case of translating from Russian into English, the generalization strategy was the most popular. Second place was substantiation, then explication, and then literal translation, only 3 cases. Same in English, literal translation, only 3 cases, explication and substantiation pretty much the same, and then generalization, only 26% of cases. But here the situation differs, right? When translating from Russian into English, we use generalization more, whereas when translating from English into Russian, we use more substantiation. Now, again, as I said, each lexical gap should be reviewed on its own personally, but still we could say that probably generalization strategy could be more efficient when applied when dealing with translation from Russian to English, and the substantiation strategy could be more useful when applied when translating from English into Russian. Now, this is all from me. This is the list of my references if you're interested, all the papers that I used, and if you happen to have any questions, I will be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Polina, for the most interesting and informative presentation. Any questions? Armen, I see your hand, please, Uli.
Yes, thank you, Polina, for your...
Sorry, I just noticed that my camera wasn't on, but now it is.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was very interesting. And my question is, in your opinion, which strategy is the most universal, not the effective, but universal?
Well, again, as I said, every lexical gap is unique, and in each situation, we should look at the broad context of the text that we're translating and find a personal translation strategy for every lexical gap. But I personally believe that explication strategy is the most effective, because when we are explaining what the lexical gap means, yes, we are probably losing some of the stylistic value of the text, but at least we are able to really tell the reader of the text the full meaning of the lexical gap, right? At least the meaning isn't lost. Maybe some stylistic value is lost, but the meaning is preserved. So I believe that the explication strategy works better in most cases.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question, but it's about the material of the study. So you studied the written translations, did you?
I did.
Yes. Do you think that the situation could change? I mean, this calculation, or I don't know, of usage could change if we speak about oral translation or interpretation?
I believe so, yes, because when we are dealing with a written text, of course, we have, even if the deadline is really tight, we still have some time to read the text, to understand the meaning of the lexical gap, to use Google, right, to see what it means. But when we are translating orally, we don't really have that time. So I think in most cases, that's just my rough estimate, but I think in most cases, translators, when they encounter such lexical gaps, they will either drop them altogether, just not translate them at all, or maybe if they have enough time, they will try to explain them. Yeah, I believe that would be the case.
So you believe that the most frequent case could be just omitting it, am I right?
I believe so, yes, because when we are translating orally, especially if it's simultaneous interpreting, you don't really have enough time to think about the, all the connotations of the meanings of the lexical gap, right?
No connotations, of course. I was just thinking about omitting it because sometimes they're very meaningful. Yeah, there's culture-specific words could be really very meaningful, and you lose a lot. Yeah, if you simply omit them. Yeah, but this is a serious puzzle. I mean, a never-ending problem for translators.
Unfortunately, yes.
For oral translators, I'm talking about interpreters. Okay, thank you. So, any other
anyone
questions?
have any questions?
I have a question, actually. Since you decided to focus on publicistic discourse, I would like to know if you uncovered any differences in lexical gaps in publicistic discourse in comparison to lexical gaps in general?
Mhm.
Do
Yeah,
they
thank you
pose
for your
more of
question.
a significant problem in comparison to?
Yes, I would say so. Yes, I didn't really compare them. I mean, lexical gaps outside of publicistic discourse, I didn't compare them. So I can't say for sure, but I do think that they are different because in publicistic discourse, in news articles, we are mostly dealing with the socio-economic situation of the country, right? The political situation. So more often than not, these lexical gaps that I encountered had to deal with, with some specific terms, with some phrases related with politics, economy, with social issues. So I believe in real life, in everyday situations, those lexical gaps are more related to maybe some cultural aspects. Like some, I don't know, movies, books, stuff like that. But in publicistic discourse, it's more about politics and economy, those types of issues.
I see. Okay. Irina, are you happy with the answer? Yeah?
Yes, thank you.
Don't look puzzled. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation, and we wish you every success here in your research, because it's always topical, you know, like all intercultural types of research. It's always topical, always relevant. Thank you very much, Pauline.
Thank you.
And we continue. And this time we'll be talking about time. It was long ago established that time flows differently in different cultures, in different type of cultures. And our next speaker is Svetlana Mikrykova, who is going to tell us about linguocultural problems of translating time designations. Yeah? So please.
Yes, thank you. Let me share the screen. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, it works.
Yes, it's full screen.
Okay, so good afternoon, dear colleagues and members of this conference. My name is Mikrykova Svetlana, and I'm very glad to see and hear you all. Today, I would like to draw your attention to the study on the subject linguocultural problems of translation of time designations, functional aspects. So, time is passing and realities are changing. This is mostly about time, what people of previous generations were doing at one particular moment of the day, we are now doing at another one. Today, we don't always agree on the times of our, for example, meals. Some of us have dinner at 8, while others have supper at 5. It wasn't always that way, and this is a natural process that without doubt affects linguistics. Modern translators face difficulties looking for all possible ways to adapt time and action that take place at this time to the modern society. With the development of translation practice, translators have an opinion that an exact translation of such a phenomenon is impossible. Each language contains a unique picture of the world that determines the worldview of the native speakers. And the peculiarities of each language affect the peculiarities of the mindset of native speakers as well. And as a result, it is difficult for a translation to convey the original idea in any case. So particular attention in the study is paid to these factors, which make the translation of time categories complicated. You can see the object and the subject of my report on the screen. The objective of this report is to reveal several linguocultural peculiarities of time designations accepted in England and Russia, and offer options how to solve the translation problems of that kind of designations. The tasks are to define what cultural linguistics is, to describe linguocultural particularities of time designations according to English and Russian lexis, and to analyze and provide possible solutions to these problems. So what is cultural linguistics? Cultural linguistics is the humanitarian scientific discipline of synthesizing type, which is characterized mostly by a holistic, parity, and systemic consideration of culture and language. The main objects of cultural linguistics are, the first one is the relationship and interaction between culture and language, and the second one is the analysis of interpretations of this interaction as a unified systemic integrity. Back in 1836, Wilhelm von Humboldt formulated the thesis about the relationship between the nature of the language and the character of the nation in his main work on the diversity of human language construction and its influence on the mental development of the human species. Language, according to Humboldt, is the reality of culture, since only through it a person can get to know the culture. However, the hypothesis of linguistic relativity, also known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, added the motivation for the appearance of cultural linguistics. It was publicized in 1956, and it refers to the proposal that the particular language one speaks influences the way one thinks about reality. So, linguistic relativity stands in close relation to semiotic level concerns with the general relation of language and thought. Cultural linguistics is currently bringing us new issues and revealing new aspects of translatability. The relevance of the topic is due to the fact that now, as never before, a large number of texts, from belletristic literature to scientific articles, are being translated, while some translators pay insufficient attention to linguocultural nuances, which are restating the original meaning of the text. So let's have a look at the example. When I was studying at school, my teacher told me that dinner is translated as обед, but now it changed and it is translated mostly as ужин. Why is it so? Dinner means the main meal of the day. Until the beginning of the 20th century, it was held at modern lunchtime. And in evening, people usually finished the leftovers of the day's food. But later, the reality changed and people stopped eating heavily at lunchtime due to their working conditions. As a result, the honorable mission of gathering the whole family together moved on to evening dinner. However, if you've ever read Oscar Wilde's plays or novels, you notice how his characters are always invited for dinners in evenings, and Oscar Wilde used to write his novels in 19th century, before the meaning changed. I reviewed Oscar Wilde's novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, and its translation into Russian language by Maria Efimovna Apkina. In the process, I noticed that the interpreter took into account the fact that Oscar Wilde lived in 19th century and therefore translated dinner as обед. So you can see some examples. I will probably tell you only one of them. For example, the second one. Yes, after I've left you yesterday evening, Harry, I dressed, had some dinner at that little Italian restaurant. So you can see the word evening, which shows us the lateness of the hour. However, Maria Efimovna Apkina translated it, the dinner, as обед, still, despite the fact that it was done in evening. And the whole text, the whole novel was translated like that. So it should also be borne in mind that characters of Oscar Wilde's novels are aristocrats, and their lunch was very modest, as the aristocracy had no time for a detailed meal in the middle of the day, and dinner was served as a rule very late. It could be served even in 10 o'clock in the evening. So Maria Efimovna Apkina saved the identity of that time by keeping the original meaning of this word. So next, similar bewilderment among Russian-speaking people is caused by words branch. There is no exact translation of this word into our language, like late breakfast or early lunch, so this meal is not common among residents of Russia. However, this term has become widely used recently, and the interpreters and even Russian authors themselves apply word branch in their works. For example, the first sentence you can see was taken from the book What I Know About Running Coffee Shops. It was written by an Irish barista, Colin Harmon. I couldn't find the original while surfing the internet, so you can see only the translation by Tatiana Gutman. And it was done in 2021, and she translated the word branch just like that. Just like it is a calque. And the second sentence is taken from the book The Golden Cupid, written by Evgenia Borisovna Spiranskaya. She is a Russian detective writer, and she just used the word branch by themselves, just like how it is in English language. She didn't use another meal, she just used branch because now this word is pretty used in our language, and therefore word branch was included to the dictionary of hotel industry terms written by Yulia Palushka. Yes, it should be mentioned that I personally believe that the text should be translated according to the culture of the original. A person who is interested in the book will certainly go in for the context of the specifics of the time when it was written. The interpreters must be able to find the most accurate equivalent in their language, but if it's not possible due to linguocultural peculiarities, a smaller reference or a footnote at the bottom of the page is the very solution. It will not only explain the context, but also immerse the reader in the culture of the original country. Summarizing the results of my reports, I can claim that linguocultural problems will always follow the interpreters, as languages do not stop their development all the time. The interaction between culture and language in literature is very complicated and requires a special, detailed study. And there is no general method to translate linguocultural nuances, but professional translators prefer preserving the exact meaning of a word rather than seeking how to replace it with an adapted one. In conclusion, I would like to say that cultural linguistics examines the manifestations of the culture enshrined in the national language. For example, in dictionaries, linguocultural components are often left out. Now, translation is primarily an introduction to another culture, so one of the crucial tasks of interpreter becomes studying the cultural and historical characteristics of the original country. So I can say that the main goal is on my way to be reached, because I really want to review some more sources. Here you can see my references, which I used while I was doing this report. And thank you very much for your attention. I would like to answer your questions if you have any.
Thank you, Svetlana. I guess it was your kind of opening, or not phase, or what is it? Just the first show here as
Yes.
as a researcher, right?
Yes.
So we congratulate you on it. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Well. But any questions to you? Any questions from our audience?
I have a question, actually.
So, please.
Svetlana, what are the research prospects of your work? maybe its practical significance?
I personally want to also review some sources of different languages, not only Russian and English. And I don't know if I find some solutions to linguocultural problems, like not only footsteps in the bottom of the page. Maybe it will be good for me as a translator, as a future translator, to interpret the texts the way they are written without losing any meaning or sense of the original text. I mean, if you somehow replace the original word with adapted one, adapted to your language, it will lose the vibe, if I can say like that.
Okay. So, all right. Probably your older colleagues will tell you that the issue of translatability is one of the most urgent and one of the most relevant in translation studies here. And actually, all presentations today have been about exactly this issue. How translatable something can be or may be not translated in some cases. So this is a really very, I would say, not only attractive, but really fascinating issue of translation studies. How to preserve the original pragmatic effect, yes, of the text, yes, in your case of the text or of the speech. So I think we wish you all the best, yes, so that next presentations, because for example, I could recommend you if you focus on time designations here or time words, I would recommend you to study the issue of polychronic and monochronic cultures. Yeah, and for example, Russia belongs to polychronic culture, while Great Britain, British culture is mostly monochronic culture, and that actually involves a number of differences in understanding time, in treating time, and eventually it ends up in differences in complex things when you translate things. Okay, when you translate between these two languages. So thank you very much.
Thank you very so much
for your presentation. And we are going to move on and to talk about, actually, we have just one presentation left. And this is about political discourse. And here again, we're going to go back to our lacuna, to our lexical gaps. And in this case, we're going to talk about evaluative language. Evaluative language in political discourse and way of its translation, presented by Alexander Babikin, master student, second year. Please, Sasha. Sasha, can't hear you.
Okay. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I would like to present you my presentation. Okay, so, tell me if you can see it.
Yes, it's not full screen yet.
Okay, and now it's full
better.
Screen. All right, so let me start. Recently, political discourse attracts more and more attention and centers it on itself. It seems that every area of our life is literally permeated with politics. So the peculiarity of politics is in its versatility, in the vast amounts of information that a linguist and a translator can work with. Thus, let me emphasize the relevance of this study. And it follows from the following argument. As long as evaluation is present in political discourse, linguists and translators will continue to find strategies for adequate translation, transformation, and transmission from the original language into the language of translation. The object of the research is evaluative vocabulary, namely positive and negative, and the subject of the research is the translation of evaluative vocabulary in the text of political discourse from English into Russian. Moreover, it's critical to emphasize the role of evaluation in a pragmatic way. And we have two definitions which are given by Elena Mikhailovna Wolf and Nina Davidovna Arutyunova on evaluation. And we can make a following statement. Evaluation is an important factor that sets thinking and brain activity. It also maintains relationship between us and people who surround us. The objective of the study was to consider various examples of translation of evaluative language in political discourse. In this regard, there are several tasks to identify patterns and features that can be traced in translation, to identify how these particular translation features can affect representativeness, and to assess whether the evaluation can affect perception of the listener. So what is the political discourse? The famous linguist Tian Van Dijk claims that this is a class of genre that is limited only to the social sphere, political sphere. Therefore, there is a vast division on means of political discourse. On this diagram, you can see that political discourse actually includes negotiations, inauguration speeches, interviews, public speeches, and etc. Therefore, there is a vast divisions, and let's move on to certain examples which illustrate what was said previously. In this particular example, you may see the statement that former U.S. President Donald Trump gave. He was evaluating his performance over the years of his presidency, and the translator transmits positive evaluative vocabulary by direct literal translation. According to the means of evaluation, it's individual, so it was said by only one person, and rational, targeted, and it was targeted on the public audience. In this particular example, Trump denotes his achievements in the perception of the listener. There is a picture of success of his presidency. It is formed, and this also affects the perception of the listeners because of the positive evaluation. There is another example, but with negative connotation. You can see in this example that Donald Trump negatively refers to the Paris Agreement, which basically limits the emission of harmful substances into the atmosphere. However, for Trump, this agreement had negative consequences in economic terms. So the translator also, in my opinion, accurately and literally translated this passage. And again, it is aimed on the public, and it's rational, so it is said by only one person. When translating evaluative vocabulary, it is important to be precise and not to embellish the details. The importance of this particular translation is to convey the statement with the utmost accuracy and full content. Evaluation influences translation and perception, since political speeches are aimed at ordinary people. It draws attention of ordinary people. And according to what I said previously, in those two particular examples, translator used literal translation, and in my opinion, it suited, like, it was best option there. But there are different examples which were not included, and you may find them everywhere, which also give the full image of various translation techniques and means which can be applied. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sasha. I have a comment. You can't find this everywhere here. It's probably too broad a field to send us to. Okay, so any questions to the speaker? I have actually one question. What shall we do with so-called words which have different evaluation sign in different cultures? What I'm thinking about now, for example, the word parallel here. You know that in the English language, the word parallel has a positive kind of connotation when we are, let's say, on a parallel course, or we follow the parallel course. It means that we are somehow sharing the ideas of each other, and we're moving in the right directions. And if we translate this into Russian and say мы двигаемся параллельным курсом, it means that we never, parallel lines in Russian never cross, yeah? So it's kind of negative, yeah? So we don't care for each other. When we say мне это параллельно, it means that I don't care. So what to do with, so we have different evaluation signs. In English it's positive, in Russian it's negative. So what to do? What's to be done?
Well, I believe that it's up to the translator who translates it. If he or she has the knowledge on the topic, and he's actually good at his craft, I mean the translator, he must overcome the difficulty. I believe that there are no universal decisions on this particular example that you have illustrated. Well, I believe it's only up to the translator.
Okay, but don't forget about this case. I mean, because this is a very popular phrase, yeah, speaking about that we are on a parallel course in publicistic and political discourse. So when you consider your cases, don't forget about it. It's kind of controversial from the translation point of view, right? There are a lot of examples when we have different evaluative signs in different languages, yeah, of the same concept. Yeah? It's enough to remember, for example, the word swamp in the Finnish, for example, language, which has definitely positive. It's very positive. Swamp is good. And in Russian, it's never positive. It's definitely negative. So it's all about evaluation. Okay, any questions? I guess you're all tired because it's been a long day today, yeah? Especially for some of you. So thank you very much, Sasha. Do we have any more speakers? I guess no. No.
That is all.
That is all. So according to the procedure, to the official procedure, now there is time for discussion, for the general discussion. And I must ask everybody if you want to say something, to comment on the event, on our panel. Since we actually commented on each of the presentations, probably there is nothing more to say. Okay, no speakers, no people.
I just wanted to add that it was a really, really interesting conference. Really, you know, we discussed a lot of different issues. They were all kind of interconnected, right, with all the translation issues, lexical gaps, but it was still very interesting to listen to each presentation.
Yeah, it's very interesting to listen and to see your weak points, your strong points, because when you read or your scientific advisor reads, it's not that way. Only when you present your findings to the audience, your weak and strong points can be seen. and can be discussed. So you're badly welcome to participate in all our discussions, in all our conferences. I think that was a good beginning, actually, for all of you to present your findings at our conference. I want to thank you very much, and to sum up by saying that this is the topic that will always be relevant, because the issues of intercultural communication will never fade away. Yeah? They will always remain on the top of the list of the problems and issues considered by modern linguistics. So I want to thank everybody for your participation, for your presentations, and wish you all the best in your future research and your future investigations. Let's put it in a very serious way, investigations of your problems. Okay, thank you very much. I think we should stop here and stop the recording. And thank you for participation, and for those who were present, I mean, for our guests, for staying with us. Okay, did it stop? No.